In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the top 10 most boring Star Wars action figures in my collection, and some of these are so boring that it's made Bush Leia here fall asleep. So one thing I'll mention immediately is that just because I say it's a boring action figure, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad action figure. Boring just simply means you get it in hand, and even sometimes before you even purchase it, it's like, wow, this is just kind of a boring release. There's just not a whole lot to say about it. Maybe it's been released way too many times, and at this point it's just boring. And it doesn't mean the tooling is bad necessarily. It doesn't mean it's an unnecessary release. It's just boring. It's just plain as that. You get it in hand, you display it, and you look at it, and it's like, wow, that's just a very boring action figure. And we'll get into the details of some of them here in a little bit. I'll mention as well, similar to my last few top 10 videos, there is no particular order to this. It's just 10 action figures. I wouldn't say 10 is any more or less relevant than number 1. Although I think in this case, the figure I'll say for number 1 probably is a little bit more boring and disappointing compared to the rest, and I'll get into why that is. But anyways, let's just go ahead and jump right into figure number 10 here. So figure number 10 here is the TVC Sand Trooper. It was the first release of the Sand Trooper, not the one with the orange pauldron. This is one that peg warmed heavily for the longest time, at least in my area it did. And I ended up getting this eventually on clearance because it's like, well, you can't go wrong with having extra troopers in your collection. But to me, after having this in hand and even before I bought it, I'm thinking, this is just a very boring action figure, and that might be why it peg warmed for so long. It may tie into being disappointing somewhat as well, because a sand trooper obviously is going to be weathered in sand, or at least you would hope it would be. And this one's clearly clean as can be. Like, he hasn't even set foot on Tatooine at this point. And it's a tooling that I don't think is everyone's favorite. It has been reused before as a standard stormtrooper. I think this one was reused as a standard stormtrooper in the 3 3/4 inch Black Series line. And it just looks very odd. It's not the ideal stormtrooper sculpt if you're going to army build these for your collection. And because he doesn't really serve his purpose as a sand trooper, it just makes him very boring. If you put him with the rest of your sand troopers, he looks obviously out of place. You could treat him as a stormtrooper commander, but again, he's not the best sculpt for a standard stormtrooper. There's much better ones out there. So because of that, of him being kind of out of place, and he's figure number 10 for me. Figure number 9 for me is the Felucian Warrior. This might be a surprise to some people. I mean, it's a very nice looking action figure. He has a lot of good detailing in him, and I can't really think of any major complaints about him other than to me he's just a boring action figure. You can't really do much with him. I do have Maris Barud and the Force Unleashed Shaak Ti, and even with him beside them, it just seems out of place. You can't really use him for too many displays of any kind. If you have the Force Unleashed Rancor with the Rider, I suppose you could utilize him more. He looks like a character that wouldn't necessarily fit into Star Wars. Nothing in my collection he really fits in with. I just kind of have him there with my Rebels, like he's one of the Ewoks in a way, because that's all I can really do with him. But I just never really found a major purpose for him, and because of that, I find him somewhat boring. But with that being said, he is a nice action figure as far as sculpting work and looks go, but you just can't really do a lot for him. So that's figure number 9 for me. Figure number 8 I give to the Mithril. I've kind of alluded to this in my recent review of the Mithril, that he's a very boring action figure, and to me he looks more like a Star Trek character than he does a Star Wars character. Obviously he wasn't a big hit seller because you can find him on clearance on Entertainment Earth and Walmart and Amazon as well. He is a very niche character, but even for the niche community, I mean, there's just not a whole lot going for him. His accessories are nice, those are kind of unique, but it just doesn't really make up for the action figure. And with so few offerings we get in the TVC line, you think to yourself, it's like, man, Hasbro invested so much into the tooling of this, and as far as I know, he's using all new tooling, and it hasn't been reused since. So I just feel like Hasbro could have utilized their resources better for what little they do have. I mean, if you have a Cantina display, like the Navarro Cantina, or you made your own A New Hope Cantina display, I suppose he would be a good piece for that collection. But anyways, he makes number 8 for me as far as most boring, because to me he just doesn't really fit in the Star Wars very well, and there's not a whole lot you can do with him. Number 7 here I'm giving to Rose Tico. So I featured Rose Tico here before on my top 10 most underrated action figures, and I would say she's underrated in the sense that she has a lot of articulation, and at the time it was very revolutionary articulation that we've never really seen with Star Wars figures before. And the sculpting work on it is great. It looks like Rose Tico from the movie. I don't think sequel trilogy characters need a whole lot of explaining as to why they're boring, but she just doesn't really fit in most Star Wars collections. Even if you do have a Rebels collection, she just doesn't seem to fit. And the outfit she's wearing is very boring. I've often heard her referred to as wearing a potato sack, and that's pretty much what it is. And the weapons she has are kind of boring as well. They almost look like something you would see in our real world. But regardless, like I said, she is an underrated action figure in the sense of articulation and sculpt. A great action figure in that way. But as far as utility and what you can do with her, I just don't think she fits in with most Star Wars displays. She doesn't have a whole lot of colors about her that are very striking. In general, it doesn't help that she's from the sequel trilogy and she's a character that was underused, I would say. So because of that, I just find that this is a very boring action figure, and I don't think anybody's going to lose sleep on not having this for their collection. I got this on clearance from Tungori for like $6, so I don't regret having it, but I just kind of have her hanging there in the back of my Rebels collection. So because of that, Rose Tico is number 7 for me. Number 6 here is the Bespin Escape Leia. It is an essential release, and I know there was some controversy with the card at the time because it was very darkened, and you could barely see Leia on the card art there. But it's a very boring action figure, and I think just looking at it, does it really need a lot of explaining why it's boring? We've gotten so many Leias in the TBC line up at this point, and we still don't have the New Hope Leia, unfortunately. Hopefully soon. I think it's pretty much just utilizing a lot of the parts from the Hoth Leia, which is a pretty good action figure, and maybe she has a new head, that is. But other than that, it's pretty much the same exact thing as the Hoth Leia. Oh, of course, probably the boots are a little bit different. That's one thing that's kind of disappointing about this as well, is there's simply no way you're going to be able to get a peg on her feet there, and you can't drill a hole any deeper, otherwise you'll go directly through her foot. And because of that, she can barely stand on her own. If you have a very flat surface, she can, but unfortunately that's not going to be the case for most people, so oftentimes she's just leaning against something. And as you can see, she's just pretty much wearing all white, and that's all there really is to say. So to me, she's a boring action figure. We've gotten so many Leias, and this isn't one that I think people are losing sleep over necessarily. She's a good action figure, and I think a lot of people are happy to have her. I'm happy to have her for my collection. If you're going to pick 1 or 2 Leias for your collection, I don't think this is one that people are going to be jumping for, usually. So with all that said, she's a boring action figure for my collection, and she's number 6 for me. Number 5, we're going to get into some Black Series territory here, and that's another Leia, and it's the New Hope Leia. A lot of this is, I have the figure arts of New Hope Leia for my collection, and that one I think is a very nice action figure, and comparing it to this one is no contest. And on top of that, this Leia isn't everyone's fan favorite already because the head sculpt is off. There are 3 versions released of this New Hope Leia, and I've owned all 3 at one point. And the original release back in 2016, she had too poofy of a cheeks, and nobody was happy about that at all, so Hasbro did a rerun, and it's smoothing out her face a little bit. And then this is the archive version, which I can't believe Hasbro wasted a slot with archiving this action figure, especially since you could find her for cheap already still, even though it's been out for a couple years at this point. But this one utilizes the photoreal tech. But even with the photoreal tech, I just don't think it saves the action figure. I mean, after having the figure arts one, it just kind of spoils it, where this one's just kind of boring. And the figure arts one, I think, is great. It has a lot of accessories. It has different faceplates. Or you could put her hood up, and it looks proper on her. This one you can't. You just kind of put it up, and it just plain doesn't look right. Something like that, I suppose. Again, it's another action figure that I don't think needs a lot of explaining. Most people find this to be very boring. It's one that's peg-worn heavily over the years, and even to this day, with the archive version, it's been out for a couple years now, and I can still find it at most of the local retailers in my area. And I'm sure the same goes for you as well. So because of that, the Black Series of New Hope Leia is number 5 on my list for most boring. Number 4 here, I have the New Hope Jawa. So after getting the Mandalorian Jawa that came out shortly after this, that one utilized soft goods robes, and it It had a plastic hood, but it seemed to work very well together. This one's just pure plastic, and because of it's basically all pure plastic with the robes, he's kind of a statue in a way. You just can't really do a whole lot with him. Then after having that Mandalorian Jawa in hand, it just kind of ruins this one for me. And a lot of people were disappointed with this. And I think as well that they should have gone with the Mandalorian sculpt for the A New Hope Jawa instead of wasting that original Kenner action figure slot with this one. So this is just a repack of the Black Series 3 3/4 Jawa that we got back around 2014. And I suppose if you got a lot of Jawas in your collection, sure, this one might be nice. I only have the 2 Jawas, and there's not really a whole lot you can do with him. You can move his arms, and that's about it. But other than that, he's basically a statue. I just think Hasbro could have done much better with this action figure. Yeah, I can't really say much more about it. To me, he's just kind of boring because you can't really utilize him for much, and I think Hasbro could have done a better job with him. So that's figure number 4. Figure number 3 here is the 41st Elite Black Series 3 3/4 Clone Trooper, or at least that's what he's intended to be. This is the first release where he had all the mismarkings, as you can see here. But even with all that aside, to me, he's just a very boring action figure. At this point, we've gotten so many clones in the line back in 2013. Sure, people are always happy to get more clones. I don't think this is the one that's the most exciting. And of course, he has the oversized helmet, and of all the clones I have in this sculpt, I think this one has it the worst out of all of them, even worse than the 501st clone and the 212th and several of the other ones. I mean, this helmet is just barely on there at all. It just kind of sits there and he has no neck. And again, it's another action figure. Doesn't really need a lot of explaining. This one's been criticized time and again. I'm happy to have it, and I think it's okay of an action figure, but it's not one, again, that people are going to be losing sleep about not having for their collection. So because of that, he's just kind of a boring one to add for me personally. Probably the most boring clone I have. And he makes number 3. And figure number 2 here is the Jedi version of Galen Merrick, or Vader's Apprentice, for the Force Unleashed Evolutions pack. So I recently reviewed this, and I kind of talked more in detail about some of the complaints I had with this action figure at that time, mostly being that Hasbro kind of cheapened out on this one. They went all out with the Sith Stalker, and they went all out with this particular Vader's Apprentice here, in his more iconic outfit that we first recognize him as. But this one, they kind of cheapened out on him, where they didn't give him the hinged elbows, which I think are very essential. The paint on it is just very basic in comparison. There's not a whole lot of detail to say about it. You can almost, he don't even really look like Galen Merrick at all. He just looks like some standard background Jedi that you can have in a Jedi temple display, that is. But there's just not a whole lot you can do with him because he doesn't have the hinged elbows. You can pretty much just have him in that one pose there. You're just kind of disappointing with the potential that was going with that pack. You had the Sith Stalker, Vader's Apprentice, which they went all out for and are highly sought after. And then you got this one, which it seems like Hasbro, by the time they got to this one, they're like, don't worry about it. We've done well with the other 2, so just do the bare minimum for this and we'll call it good. Because of that, it's just a boring action figure for the collection, and I treat him more as a background Jedi than anything else. So he's figure number 2. So figure number 1 here might be a surprise to some people, but I picked the Build-A-Droid YVH droid. Well, I think this is one that was kind of a mistake on Hasbro's part. They shouldn't have made this a Build-A-Droid. I think they should. As you can see, he doesn't stand very well. I took him off his stand here because he stands at a lean, because the peg is too small for him, but that's probably about the best I can do for him. But anyways, I think Hasbro should have done just a standard release for this instead of making him a Build-A-Droid. With the YVH droids, these are very elite droids, at least in the expanded universe, that's how they're written. And I think they should have gone all out with him with the articulation. Instead, he only has swivel hips and swivel shoulders, and that severely limits him. I would almost put this more in the disappointing category than just plain boring. But because he has these limitations about him, you can't really do a whole lot with him, and he's kind of boring. And he only comes with the one weapon here. I would think maybe that's all the YVH droids use. It's been a while since I've read some of those EU novels that they were featured in. But it just seems like Hasbro could have done a lot more with this action figure. I think they should have made it a standard release. They should have went all out with his articulation, with the hinged hips and the hinged shoulders. This is all you can really do with him, is just have him stand like this and a lean. If you have a stand on him, and even if you don't have a stand on him, he just doesn't stand very well because his feet are too close together. It's just a severely limited action figure, and because of that, there's just not a whole lot you can do with him, and to me, it just makes him a very boring action figure. If there's one that Hasbro could go back to the drawing board and redo, this would be one that I think would be a good contender. So because of that, I put him as number 1 on my top 10 most boring list. And that's my top 10 list of most boring action figures. Some of these might be some surprises to some people, some of them might not be. Some of them you might agree with, some of them you might not. Let me know in the comments what you think. But as you can see, a common theme with a lot of these, there's either not a lot of color or there's just not a whole lot going for them. Or maybe some of them are limited to what they can do and it just makes them boring because they can't really do what they're intended to do or what their potential could be. And like I said, just because I say these are boring, I love all 10 of these action figures. I wouldn't trade them for anything. But they're not action figures that I'm going to be doing a whole lot with other than having them hang out in the background and displayed with their respective counterparts, which are necessary for the Hasbro Star Wars line. But even the ones that typically fall into that category, a lot of times they're very interesting, like Nikto or Wolf or Yak Face or any of those characters. They're just very interesting to look at. These ones are just not that interesting to look at in the grand scheme of things. It's like, yeah, he's there, and I'm glad he's there. I'm happy to have him, but that's really all there is to say about it. But that's all I can really say about this. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with this list? Would there be some that you swap out and put in with others? Is there some that I'm missing here that you think I should have acknowledged? Let me know what you think in the comments. Everyone's always got a list of boring action figures that they can write out, so let me know what you think. But anyways, that concludes this top 10 video. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more top 10 videos. There will be lots more to come in the future. And if you haven't already, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you know when more get posted. And check out the Instagram in the description as well. More content will be posted on that. And thanks for watching.